Adventure Time, from the day that it premiered, was my favorite show, and it remained that way until the day it ended. And now that it's been revived through Fiona and Cake and we're getting a second season of it, it had me thinking what could have been better throughout Adventure Time's run. Because despite me loving this show, I still have my fair share of issues with it. One such issue being how the Lich was treated. Despite being one of the most badass villains to come out of Western animation, the Lich feels like he was ultimately wasted as a character. He had so much potential and hype around him, and even lived up to most of it, but ultimately I feel like he was wasted. Especially with stuff that we got later on, like him being a reincarnation of a Catalyst Comet, as well as being one of the Scholars of Golb, something that should have been fleshed out more. Also, he had every right to be the final villain of Adventure Time. He should have won a few times. All the Lich did was lose ultimately. Despite me loving this character, I can't help but say that he was wasted in my opinion. There was just so much more that could have been done with him. But if you disagree, let me know. But to me, he's just a bunch of good ideas that should have been expanded on. Like for instance, the Scholars of Golb. I will not let that go. They should have seen a revival in the main series. But maybe that's just me. My next issue is admittedly very minor, but it's about Flame Princess, who is most people's favorite princess in the show. Other than PB, who has a lot of haters, so the census is never accurate on that one. But back to Flame Princess. Why was she pushed out of the limelight so hard? As one of the most popular non-main characters, you'd think they'd want to keep her in the story. But when Rebecca Sugar went to go work on Steven Universe, this part of the show that she had been handling, mostly dealing with Flame Princess, was thrown out. While I like most of what they did with her, other than like Frost and Fire, that episode's ass, she was handled relatively well, but I still wish she was in the main part of the story. I actually liked that her and Finn broke up, mostly due to Finn's growth after the fact being amazing, and also Huntress Wizard. I love Huntress Wizard. I would have liked FP to be more involved in the main story, especially after her and Finn got back to being friends. But back to my more major issues, like Golb. Not really Golb, but more so its build-up and how it was executed. Like, why wasn't it talked about more? I know that he probably wasn't originally going to be the final antagonist, but he was, and he should have been talked about more so that it would be less jarring when he became the final antagonist. A mini arc like Stakes or Islands would have been cool, like the Scholars of Golb getting a resurrection and Finn has to go deal with that. That could have led Betty to knowing more about what Golb was than what the Enchiridion had written down, which could have then led to the finale. Also, the Lich should have mentioned Golb a few times, like he is the last Scholar of Golb. That should have been brought up before he was about to get packed up by Sweet Pea. But that's just me spitballing, so But for a more minor issue that I have, the Enchiridion should have been more important. Something called the Hero's Handbook should have been guiding Finn throughout all of his adventures, or at least a good chunk of them, but instead it was destroyed in the Season 4 finale, and then it came back during Elements just to get swiped by Betty, and that's pretty much the last we heard about it. At least that's the end of it until Simon tries to summon the red space baby. Like I said, this one was relatively minor, but my next one isn't. The final issue I want to talk about is one part in the Fiona and Cake ending. It should be relatively minor, but it bothers me so much. In an almost perfect 10-episode run, they fumbled one part in the ending, and that's Jay leaving Farm World to stay in Fiona World. This wouldn't be nearly as egregious if Finn hadn't just taken a really bad head injury, and if he didn't have a bunch of little siblings who might have just been orphaned by this. It just doesn't sit right with me. Let it be known that I don't think Finn was critically injured, but I do think he's out of commission for a while, which is still bad. I'm hoping this issue gets cleaned up in the second season, but right now it still bothers me. But even with these issues that I have, my hopes are still really high for the future of Adventure Time. Criticism is just part of how I show my appreciation for a series that I like, and this show is still at the top of my list. And that's all I've got for this. There's some cartoons and some anime that I want to talk about in the future, and I hope you'll stick around to see it. Catch you later.